And we are back with Karan, and he is going to walk us through the pathogen control index and give us his insights.
Yeah, hi. Okay, let me try to share my screen because I do want to show people what this looks like. Here it is. Okay, sharing screen now.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, let me know if you see the full screen view whenever this.
Now we're still seeing the presentation. There we go.
Is this full screen now?
Full screen.
Okay, awesome. So this is really an important part of the report. And it's certainly, I think, one of the areas that everyone kind of hones in on because people are so used to seeing pathogen presence and absence and high and low on other tests that they've done. And I know 9 out of 10 times when somebody comes in with a dysfunctional gut or symptoms of a dysfunctional gut, the thinking is that there's a pathogen involved in the dysfunction.
Right.
Now, that's not always the case, right? So it's important to note that the presence of pathogens in the microbiome does not mean that they have any negative effect at all with outcomes for the individual, whether it's symptomatic or disease related. Specifically, those kind of outcomes are not necessarily driven by the presence of pathogens. It's the relative abundance of pathogens, especially in the context of the rest of the microbiome. So that's a really important thing to continue to keep in mind, is that the presence of pathogens is not an absolute, and their presence is not a sign of dysfunction. It's the relative abundance and context that the pathogen is within the rest of the microbiome, and what the rest of the microbiome looks like matters a lot. So in order to really explain that and exemplify that, we created something called a pathogen control index. Now we look at a number of specific pathogens, ones that are relatively common and tend to be correlated with disease outcomes or symptomology or dysbiosis in general, right? So we're sequencing these 16 or 17 or so pathogens, or doing full genome sequencing to look for the presence of pathogens. And not only are we looking for the presence, but we're looking at their relative abundance to other microbes in the gut microbiome. Again, I can't emphasize this enough, that if just because they're there, it doesn't mean they're a problem. It's the relative abundance, the whole ecological mix. So that's why this index occurs. Now, this is counterintuitive because when you see pathogen and you see a high number, you think, well, that's not good.
Right.
But this is a control index, right? So what this means is how effective is the rest of your microbiome at controlling your pathogens that are present. Everybody has pathogens. And in fact, most pathogens in the gut have some beneficial function as long as they're well controlled. So in this case, the higher the number, the better it is. It tells you how strong the rest of your microbiome is in terms of controlling these pathogens. Now, why the shift in thinking? Because most other tests and reports tell you the pathogens with the +3, or it's high or it's low, versus telling you about the rest of the microbiome and how they're controlling the pathogens. Well, the reason for that is this is much more actionable, right? If you have a single pathogen that seems to be a little bit a little bit higher according to a particular test, how do you go after that one single pathogen?
Right.
Right? If it says, Klebsiella pneumoniae is elevated in your sample, okay, well, that's great. How do I go after Klebsiella pneumoniae?
Right.
What is the magic pill that is the anti-Klebsiella pneumoniae pill that I can put into my system that won't also damage the rest of the microbiome, right? So ultimately, within a healthy microbiome, it's the strength of the rest of the commensal organisms to control the growth of the pathogens, which is really important. So this is really an occurrence, the occurrence of pathogens with respect to the rest of the microbiome, and the strength of the rest of the microbiome to control the pathogens is what this is describing. Now, let's talk about what you'll see on the report. So there are two parts of this. One is the index itself. This gives you a score. This is an actual person's data, right? This is not a sample report. This is one of the first reports that was completed. We've reviewed it, and the person will probably be getting the report. So they actually have a very high pathogen control index. In fact, this was supported. If you look at the rest of their first page of their data, they had pretty high alpha diversity with respect to where the U.S. healthy population is. They had their beta diversity is right in the cluster where the healthy population is. Their resistome was a little bit weak, and I'll talk about what that means, but their pathogen control index is really high, meaning they actually have really good, strong commensals that seem to be controlling pathogens, and none of the pathogens that we tested, that we test for, are actually out of range, right? So, and that's a really important thing to know, because in the report itself, we're not going to show you anything about the range of pathogens unless they are out of range. If they're within the range of the U.S. healthy population, you won't see anything, right? And then right after the pathogen control index, you'll get a list of all of the pathogens that we did sequence for, and it'll say explicitly none of these are out of range. Now, if any of them are out of range, you'll see something like this, where it shows you the pathogen, it shows you what the healthy range is, and what the sample range is. This part is from a sample report because this individual had nothing out of range because nothing was reported on there. But you'll have actual numbers here that tell you how far out of range it is. And of course, along with that, you get nutritional, lifestyle, and supplement recommendations to help deal with that specific pathogen. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these recommendations are also going to help improve your control index by strengthening the commensal bacteria so that the commensal bacteria can control that pathogen better, right? So that's the idea here, is we're not necessarily just focused on going after pathogens, antimicrobials, hitting them with the antibiotics, whatever it may be. We are looking at how do we strengthen the rest of the microbiome so that the microbiome itself can keep the pathogens at the control levels that they should be. So that's the pathogen control index. That's important how you look at that as well. Now, just a quick note on this individual's resistome. We talked about in a previous video that the resistome is a ecological driver of the strength and stability of the population, the homeostasis of the population, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's important to note. So this individual had high alpha diversity, which means that they had a good number of species when compared to U.S. healthy population. They had good beta diversity, which means that the types of bacteria that they have fit right in with the U.S. healthy population. They didn't have any crazy extraneous loads of extraneous bacteria that put them outside of the range of the U.S. healthy population, but the resistome tended to be lower. Now, what that tells me is that the ecological forces that are maintaining homeostasis is a little tenuous, okay, right? Even though the microbiome seems to be okay in the overall picture right now, when you dig then deeper down into the report, you will see a few things that are out of range. And those few things, when you fix them, it improves the resistome, it improves the ecological forces that maintain homeostasis. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just a little aside on the pathobiome video here that I didn't expect to talk about, but this gives you just a little bit of insight on that part of the microbiome, and that was this specific individual's results. But here's a pathobiome index. It's a control index. It's how strong your microbiome is in controlling pathogens. The higher the number, the better. In this case, if your pathogen control index is way down here in the red, that means that your commensal bacteria are not doing a good job of controlling the pathogens, and there will likely be a number of pathogens that are high outside of the range. So the particular attention needs to be paid to those. If for nothing else, just to bring back balance into the microbiome, or some of those pathogens could be directly correlated with the symptoms people are experiencing, and you would work with your healthcare practitioner about it. Last part is, why is this not diagnostic, right? No sequencing tests is diagnostic for pathogens. All right, that we have to be very clear with that. Every microbiome stool sequencing test that's out there None of those are diagnostic. The reason why is FDA has very specific rules as to what can be considered a diagnostic, right? It has to be an approved medical device, just like an approved drug if you're going to make a claim on the effect of the drug. These approved devices have to go through a whole bunch of FDA rigor to be able to be used as a claim for being diagnostic, because the last thing the FDA wants, and the medical profession in general, is misdiagnosis of pathogens, right? And so the only types of processes right now that are approved by the FDA to be a diagnostic are qPCR methodologies and culture methodologies. And these culture and qPCR methodologies have to go through a whole bunch of rigor. For example, if I have a sequencing study, which is this, let's say I want to do biome effects as a diagnostic for pathogens. Let's take one pathogen, Clostridium difficile, right? What I have to then show the FDA is in numerous people, hundreds of people who have confirmed C. diff infection, and the infection has to be confirmed by a different already approved methodology. I have to show that my method 100% of the time also picks up C. diff, right? And then I have to show the FDA in 100 people or 1,000 people, depending on how they power these studies, who don't have C. diff, and these people are confirmed by a previously approved methodology, that my method are not going to accidentally pick up C. diff, right? And then you have to do this thing like 3 or 4 times in a row. So you have to do all of this validation, and you have to go through these approval if you want to be a diagnostic test. So if any companies who are doing sequencing are telling you that it's diagnostic, it's not. There has not been any sequencing methodologies that have been approved by the FDA as a diagnostic for pathogen control or for pathogen presence in the microbiome samples.
Okay,
right? So important to know. That's why we're not a diagnostic. We're not telling you that these bacteria are here and causing an infection. We can't tell you that. That's not what the test is designed for. It's designed to give you an idea of what the relative abundance is of pathogens to commensals, and if there is some dysfunction in that relative abundance that could be leading to symptomology.
Excellent.
Right? Yeah, we can't diagnose an illness from it.
Exactly. And I appreciate how you link that back to the resistome too, because it's showing us then how to look at this test and link it back to other sections. And it really is telling the story of the individual in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're giving like a narrative on what's going on in this complex ecological environment in their gut. And again, all of this should be paired with a really strong history that you take, symptomology, other tests that you might be doing, organic acid testing, immunological testing. All of those put together gives you an overall picture of your patient or client. This in itself is not going to give you all of the answers. It's a potentially important part of the picture.
100%. Thank you.
You're welcome.